No mai, haere mai, piki mai, ka ki mai, kia ora e tiwi, and welcome to 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We do 30 minutes with one guest and no cuts, so what we record is what you get. America pummeled Iran for nearly 4 months, but couldn't get the unconditional surrender or regime change that Donald Trump had wanted. Russia thought they could take Ukraine in weeks and are still fighting 4 years on. What does this tell us about conflict in the mid-2020s, and what lessons are there for the West as it frets about the rise of China? Our guest today is American Brigadier General David Stilwell. He spent 35 years in the US Air Force. He was Defence Attaché at the US Embassy in Beijing and then Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in Donald Trump's first term, the top US diplomat for Asia. He's currently visiting New Zealand, so let's start the clock. 30 minutes with Brigadier General David Stilwell. Brigadier General David Stilwell, welcome to 30.
Glad to be here. Welcome and greetings from Hawaii. Yep.
Thank you very much. Look, you have immense military experience, as we touched on in the introduction there. You've been a fighter pilot, you've been a general and then a diplomat in more recent years. Do you regard the war in Iran as a success or a failure?
As you would expect, I would say neither, but I would tell you that we've dealt with Iran for a long time. I dealt with Iran a lot in the 90s when I was flying over Iraq doing Operation Southern Watch. They've been doing this, sponsoring terror for a long time. So I sort of summarize the current era with the thought that the assumption is that taking action is risky and inaction comes with no risk. And I challenge that assumption. If you sit back and watch Iran, who has stated clearly that they want a nuclear program, and as a government that is constantly chanting death to America, death to Israel, you eventually get to a point where the risk of inaction exceeds the risk of taking action. And that's where we ended up when we decided to look at regime change there.
But we didn't get regime change,
Correct.
did we? We got the hardline son of Khomeini who was killed. And in terms of nuclear ambitions, well, that's been kicked off to this sort of 60-day negotiating period. So what was the good bit? I mean, what did we actually achieve?
So I can't speak to the current administration, but I know the thought process in the previous, when I was there, is paralysis by analysis, which is what I experienced when I was in the Pentagon before the Trump administration, is waiting for the perfect solution to come means you're never going to do anything. And now you're a victim of circumstance. You've allowed yourself to just be carried along by circumstance into who knows what, where you're going to end up. Whereas, if you understand that by taking action, you can then deal with the outcomes, knowing that you're in a process where people with good ideas are going to make good suggestions, then you're generally better off. And I think we accomplished that in the first Trump administration. Obviously, it remains to be seen in this one. But the thought process is we can all sit by and wait for a nuclear armed Iran with intermediate or long range missiles.
But
are we worse off or better off right now? I think most would say nothing's changed.
Well, do you think we are better off after the Iran war and all the economic consequences and the loss of life that was incurred by that battle? Are we better off?
Well, we can speak tactically and then we can speak strategically. Tactically, we're definitely better off. We've taken out a whole bunch of their weaponry that was being used to attack Israel. If you remember, after Operation Midnight Hammer, they sent everything they had at Israel. We, in cooperation with Israel and others, spent a lot of effort preventing a completely illegal use of weapons against a peace-loving state targeting civilians. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about Hezbollah and Hamas sending rockets just indiscriminately into housing areas in Israel? We never talk about that. We only criticize what the US and others do. I think we should talk more about dealing with the threat and the evil that Iran and its terrorist objectives have created. So what do we do? We defanged much of the Iranian military. We've certainly put a giant dent in their missile attack capabilities. We've set their nuclear program back by a long way. It's gotten pretty close, to developing weapons that they would use. I believe they would use those. So we have accomplished something in that regard. Do we accomplish everything? Of course not. We tried, we failed, but I think we have something we can work with. Now, do you know the details of the agreement? Because I certainly don't. It's sounding like it's a lot less than it was advertised, but we could still work from that towards something better. Last thing, strategically, when I was in the War College, an Indian classmate made a great point that why does the U.S. spend so much effort on defending the Middle East and ensuring access to Middle East oil when since 1974, the first embargo, we have worked toward becoming basically energy independent. So why does the U.S. expend so much blood and treasure in the Middle East? The Indian officer says it's not your problem. It says India, China, Europe. Europe should spend a lot more time keeping the Strait open, keeping Iranian malfeasance down. And the question is, why does the U.S. care so much for the Middle East?
Well, the thing is, the Strait of Hormuz was open for business before America attacked Iran.
Who closed the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, it was open before you attacked them, though, wasn't it?
Who closed it? Iran closed it.
Yeah,
why are we the bad guy in that? That was their choice to close an international waterway.
But why did they close it?
Well, they could have done a lot of things. Maybe they were going to close it.
They closed it because America attacked them.
Again, they closed it. They didn't have to do that. They affected, it's the same thing as launching missiles into a civilian neighborhood. It was a completely indiscriminate and illegal action that they took. Why they took it,
you could argue that the war itself was illegal, and most experts in terms of international law would argue that it was an illegal war.
Look, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to argue that. You can argue both sides of this. But what I take issue with is that anytime somebody else does something, it's immediately America's fault. And clearly, it's not. I mean, again, look at Hamas attacks Israel October 7th, 2023. I hear more about the poor Hamas and Palestinians than I do about what they did to Israel.
I'm certainly not defending any terrorism here, but even for a country like New Zealand, this had huge economic consequences, and the cost has been put at over $1 trillion in terms of a reduction in world GDP. And that Strait of Hormuz was closed because of the military action of America and Israel. So to tout it as a win that we're reopening the strait seems a rather unlikely metric to actually champion. What would be your response to that?
Well, I just say that, again, Iran does what Iran does. And I think we've demonstrated that their thought process does not comport with international law. But we're more critical of what the U.S. does than what the Iranians are doing? I don't think so. Anyway, that's my position, is that the U.S. took action to deal with an immediate problem. And as I said before, rather than sit there and wring our hands deciding if we're actually going to act, we decided to take action, and now we're going to deal with the after. I mean, Midnight Hammer, where we actually used this beautiful bunker buster, straight out of the movie Top Gun Maverick, by the way. Isn't that funny? The parallels in the movie and what happened. To set that nuclear program back, which I think, do you know of anybody who agrees with allowing a theocracy in Tehran to have a nuclear weapon? I mean, if you don't like proliferation, then you should be clearly against allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But they have marched steadily down that path. And it's not going to be negotiations that they're going to violate. It's going to be physical action that stops them from that goal.
So just before we move on from Iran, because I want to talk about some of the lessons of asymmetry that this has thrown up, do you think it was strategically a smart thing to do, looking back on it now?
Yes. It demonstrates the U.S. is not afraid to act. And that accrues to other regional and global crises.
Well, you could argue that it shows the limits of American military power, because you had a stomach for, 4 months? Donald Trump was clearly concerned about the economic impacts and the gas prices at home and the midterms. I mean, doesn't this show Iran or others that actually America's appetite for military action is actually somewhat limited?
And look, I'm not here as a shill for any particular administration.
No, you're certainly not.
I'm as nonpartisan as I can be.
I respect that.
But I would just say that if we could get more of our supposed allies and partners on board with a common threat, rather than just pushing it to the U.S. and say, fix it, that's a win.
Yeah, but you didn't ask us in advance, did you? When you go back to Iraq, and I'm not saying that was a success either, but Colin Powell and George Bush went to the world, tried to get people on board. You didn't even go to Congress this time.
Yeah, no.
Certainly didn't go to any allies. We just woke up and saw the bombs were falling. There was no attempt to build a coalition at all. Was that a mistake?
again, career military guy, there is enormous benefit in the element of surprise. And if you take the time to go out there and build coalitions, 6 months going into the first Iraq war, 6 months, that allows the other side to build up in response. So sometimes the element of surprise definitely outweighs the need for global buy-in, which we weren't going to get anyway. So,
yeah, but then you asked for help, didn't you, America, in terms of opening the strait, and then publicly called out Japan and Australia and others for not responding. Does that tell you something about the ability of the US now to call on allies?
I mean, if you want to look at NATO as an example of the utility of alliances in a non-Soviet era Cold War, Dave Stilwell thinks alliances have long outlived their utility. NATO,
really?
the cost of membership of NATO is how much? 2% of GDP. Meanwhile, something like 15 or 20% of NATO countries actually complied with that.
Yeah, but when's the only time that Article 5.1...
Who cares?
Well, hang on. The only time that the article that asks other countries attack on one as an attack on all was invoked was after 9/11.
I hear that all the time. Here's what I'd say about that. The whole point of 2% of GDP is meant to deter Russia, Moscow. That's the whole point. By not deterring Moscow in 2014 and 2022, guess who rode to the rescue on that? We did. The whole point of NATO is to send a message to Moscow to deter Moscow from adventure in Ukraine and elsewhere. And when you don't do that, what you're saying is you're green lighting Putin and others, saying we don't care enough about defense to fund even a modicum, a small defense. 4% consistently the US has spent on defense. And we can't even get Spain, 1.2%, and they say we can't afford to take money away from our social programs. That, again, we're talking tactical, operational, at the strategic level. What happened, again, may not have accomplished everything, the exaggerated objectives of this, but I do think it let the world know that if you expect reasonably priced energy and all the rest, you have to carry that burden as well, not just the US.
Well, let's talk about, we can come back to Ukraine,
sure,
because you've talked about defence spending at 2% of GDP. New Zealand is aspirationally moving towards 2% of GDP on defence spending. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, was asked about this in Singapore recently, and he said 2% is not enough, and so 2% is freeloading. Do you agree with that characterisation that New Zealand is freeloading on the US by our current expenditure on defence?
I think, look, New Zealand's a unique position given the distances and the relative threat you present to others in the region. What is a good amount of defense for New Zealand is up to New Zealand, right? You're not part of some sort of a NATO alliance. So if that's Secretary of War's position, I probably wouldn't agree with that. But I do think there's a message that goes with how much you do contribute to your own defense. And that number cannot include expecting the US to ride to the rescue when the next time the Chinese Navy does exercises in your waters or is, raiding your fish stocks and your EEZs, but you don't have a Navy or a Coast Guard to defend yourselves. And so now you look to us. Well, better okay. Australia, obviously.
Let's flip it around. He's calling us a freeloader. We fought in Korea for the US. We fought in Vietnam for the US. After 9/11, we sent our SAS into hotels in Kabul to take on people who are blowing themselves up with suicide vests. We fought in Afghanistan for 20 years for you, despite no alliance.
For us?
Well, for the American-led Operation Enduring Freedom, it was called, which was started because of the planes that flew into the Twin Towers. So, to call us freeloaders.
How about the London bombing and the Madrid bombing and all the rest of that stuff that bin Laden was putting together? It wasn't just the Twin Towers. I mean, this stuff. Osama bin Laden is operating freely in Afghanistan, and somebody had to take care of that. But when we stopped that activity, it defeated terrorism in any number of places. Did it land in your shores? Probably not yet. As I said, your distance and geography helps you. Could it? Entirely possible,
sure.
Right?
But
so is it in your interest to defeat a global threat? Yeah, absolutely. If you believe, if your values are such that these things accrue globally, of course you're going to participate. You're not doing it as a favor to us. This is something this is what nations do, right? So I don't think it was necessarily a favor to the U.S. Article 5, again, I bridle at that because of the supposition that this is somehow a U.S. problem. This is a global terrorist problem, and we all need to contribute.
Mm-hmm. I promised we'd talk about asymmetry, the idea that you can have a very well-funded and sophisticated military, and yet that can be countered by often drone warfare at the moment. And we've seen this in Ukraine as well. I mean, the economics of this, for a start, we saw it in Iran, didn't we? You get these Shahed drones, I think they're called, maybe $20,000 to build one. Patriot Interceptor knocks it out of the sky. That costs $4 million, so you've got a ratio there that doesn't really stack up. Do you think that the US needs to reconfigure its military in light of this?
100%, yes. We need to change the way we look at conflict, armed conflict. The word war in the Western sense, for sure, probably New Zealand, definitely in the US, always involves people like me flying things that are painted gray and killing people and breaking stuff. That is not how our adversaries look at war, and that's definitely not how the PRC looks at war. War is political, it's economic, it's information, it's all those other things intended to bend the adversary to your will, intended to stop New Zealand from supporting issues that Russia, Iran, China don't like. And so if the free world can start rethinking its approach back to military modernization, we would still look at more tools that defeat the real threat, which isn't necessarily kinetic. There are 100 different ways to deal with the Iranian terror threat. One of those is to shoot these little drones out of the sky. Kind of had to do that, because if they're coming into New Zealand, you would want the same thing. But maybe we can get ahead of this. The Defense Department of War and others can get ahead of this thing and start defeating the manufacturer. Do you remember Operation Grim Beeper, where the Israelis got ahead of the problem and they put explosives in the beepers that the terrorists were using?
Pages, we call them in New Zealand. I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, Grim Beeper. Yeah. Brilliant. It involved getting into supply chains early on and then setting up, knowing that only that group used that thing, and then detonating them to take out their command and control and the leadership. So you're right. The old concept of warfare, especially what we got really, really good at in the Middle East, counterterror, is really OBE. It's no longer as valid as great power competition. And this is where we need to focus. And that great power competition doesn't involve us flying over the top of China doing stuff. It involves a completely different mindset, which many of us are learning from as we watch what's happening in Ukraine, is how the Russians in Ukraine, and how Ukraine has modernized and updated its military to compete very effectively against a larger Russian force.
Yes, they have. And I just wonder, and I tipped to this in the intro, that what are the lessons here? Because it seems like it's very, very hard for even a major power to win a war. I mean, you guys have found this out. You found it out in Vietnam. I mean, Iraq, had massive challenges and problems too.
Sure.
You handed back Afghanistan to the Taliban after 20 years. And now we've got this kind of scenario in Iran. Russia's faced the same problem in Ukraine. I mean, when are we going to learn?
Well, I love the way you phrased that, because the goal isn't to win. The goal is to achieve objectives. And that means you develop measurable and achievable objectives in the beginning. If you build this thing as an overall win, as we saw in World War II, which is really the last time we saw what looks like victory, that means complete surrender in both European and Pacific theaters, that hasn't happened since. We need to recalibrate our people's expectations of what we expect to achieve in any particular military or other activity.
I don't want to go back over that same ground with Iran, but Donald Trump, I was watching on the night of the invasion, and he talked about Iranians being able to take over their own country, and once we've finished, you'll be able to rise up, and he talked about regime change. I mean, those metrics just simply weren't met.
Would you disagree with that outcome? Wouldn't you like that to happen? If we enabled, it didn't happen though, did it? No, it's true. And as I'm hearing that language, I'm thinking of Chalabi, curveball, Iraq in 2003, and all those. Okay, got it. So I'm hearing the same thing. And the difference is we didn't put boots on the ground. which makes extraction much simpler. We set objectives. Some of those objectives were to degrade their command and control and their leadership, which we've done. It was definitely to degrade their capability to attack their neighbors. We accomplished that. So to say that it's a complete failure isn't quite right either, right? Did it achieve regime change? Did it make it a peaceful, democratic Iran? It did not. Is that an achievement, a goal we would like? I'd love to see that. The Iranian people would love to see that. But did we achieve some of the objectives, or at least the most important ones? I think we did.
Okay. Let's talk about China, because I want to dig into this because you're an old China hand. Did fighting in Iran weaken American ability to deal with China, do you think?
That is a distinct concern. Now, I won't talk about exactly how we do this in the Pentagon, but there is a very detailed process that ensures that we don't do that. That ensures that we always have enough of war reserve material, WRM, to take care of other regional contingencies. So I don't know this personally, and that's good because I can't be accused of, revealing secrets, state secrets. But I know that there is a process that prevents us from getting into a point where the PRC looks and goes, wow, they're completely helpless.
Yes, because you did have serious munitions run down in Iran, didn't you? I think the CSIS did the numbers and talked about some of that.
But the CSIS know what the classified numbers are. Do they know what allies and partners possess, what we can fall in on, and all the rest? So believe me, the Pentagon, with 25,000 people in that building, massive, is a well-oiled machine in this regard, accounting for our WRM, what capabilities we have left. There's no way that they emptied everything in the Pacific to take care of this one regional problem. So I would not worry about that. The PRC has not done anything extravagant. They know that we can still come ride to the rescue if we have to. And the best thing about all this isn't kinetic, it's not military, it's the Prime Minister of Japan, Takaichi. Fantastic. I mean, the right person at the right time. The Japanese peace constitution, Article 9, says they can't use war as an instrument in national policy. However, they need to get back to normal nation status. Why can't Japan have its own military? And she's doing a great job of getting back to that. Strategically, that tells the PRC that your actions are actually making things worse for you in the region than better. I mean, I love it when Xi Jinping tries one of these things and it backfires horribly and he has to go back and go, man, we screwed that up again. And he did.
He met recently with Trump at that summit, and the US paused a $14 billion arms deal to Taiwan, and there was discussion from Xi about the consequences that would happen if Taiwan was mishandled. Do you sense America's appetite to intervene over Taiwan waning a little bit? How do you read this?
No, I don't. As you know, Donald Trump is not a typical politician, and he does things differently. What worked really well in the first administration was an avoidance of bland statements and inaction. And he would say outrageous things, and we got North Korea to the table, and that was deemed impossible. And by keeping the narrative, keeping people off of balance, it definitely drove things in the right direction, I think, especially on the China account. Can you overuse that strategy, that approach? Yeah, maybe, to the point where your adversaries and your friends might be beginning to doubt what you can do. Again, I'm not going to sit in judgment, but I do think that is a possibility.
You worked for Trump. Is he a force for good in the world?
Absolutely, 100%. Just give you an example. I was in the previous administration, I won't name it, in uniform. I was in the Pentagon, and I just remember that we would sit there and talk about things we absolutely had to do, and then we'd come back and talk more about it. And we just kept talking. We never did anything because we were waiting for a solution that was absolutely risk-free, politically safe foreign policy. And I was in the Trump administration during the pandemic, and I haven't interacted with him personally in a lot, but enough that the previous administration would never change its mind. The previous administration was sure of itself and would continue. He was in a meeting where he said, I want to go down this path. And we'd actually talked about that and explained, Mr. President, we understand we went down that path. We do think if we come around at this approach on the pandemic, it would be more effective. And he went, yeah, good, makes sense. And again, seeing the difference in the two leadership styles was very encouraging to me, because you can make a good argument and succeed. Think about Mar-a-Lago, in May of 2017, when Xi Jinping came to the US to pretty much tell the Americans that you will not step out of line. During Mar-a-Lago, the president and the national security staff decided to send 57 Tomahawk missiles on the base in Syria that attacked its own people with gas under the Obama administration, violating Obama's red line. So what President Trump told Xi Jinping is, one, we're not afraid to act, and two, we're not afraid to act while you're in the room, right? And the message was received. PRC, aggressive action went way down. Now, where are we today? Again, I'm not in this administration, but I will tell you that the president does think at a level higher than just the surface of what you're seeing. There are definitely 2 and 3 layers of thought below that.
Okay. I wanted to talk to you about New Zealand's anti-nuclear policy. There was a discussion raised recently. Our Defence Minister said that we should have a conversation about the nuclear propulsion element of that policy, because as you know, I think you tried to come out here once and it didn't work because we'd suspended military training between the two countries over that mid-80s legislation. What do you make in the current world where we've got an AUKUS agreement coming, which will have nuclear-powered Australian subs at some point? What do you make of New Zealand's anti-nuclear policy? Does it make sense to you?
It's not for me to judge. You're a sovereign nation and you feel strongly about that. You've got enough energy here in geothermal to guarantee you don't have to accept either nuclear power or nuclear weapons, which nuclear power can create the material for, right? Plutonium and the rest. So I am not going to sit in judgment of your policy. As I say, your geopolitical position in the world means that you can, that's a safe place for the New Zealand people. Until the New Zealand democratic process changes that, again, I'm not going to throw stones or sit in judgment. If there were a major problem in New Zealand, and our military, our Navy, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers for sure, are major cities, and they can produce more energy, electricity, and water than, like a major city. They can produce a lot. We have done that, like in the 2004 tsunami in Indonesia. If you needed that capability here, I would ask New Zealand how you feel about accepting. Would that change your mind? Again, and that's up to you. If you want the capability, then you do whatever you have to do legislative-wise.
Do you think New Zealand may be forced to change?
No. I think, again, I have no personal stake. I don't think the U.S. has any personal stake in New Zealand's nuclear policy. If you want defense cooperation and you invite us out, and then you ask difficult questions that we, by our own policy, cannot answer, then you should expect the result.
What about Five Eyes? Do you think that is challenged by the America First doctrine? Of course, Five Eyes, for those who don't know, is the intelligence sharing arrangement between the Anglosphere countries, I guess. Do you think that is challenged by the Trump doctrine?
I don't think so. As specifically an intelligence sharing mechanism, we all bring different capabilities to the table. There's no reason to do anything different, to keep, except maybe expand it.
You'd expand it out to what, Japan?
Japan, for sure. Yeah.
And they're interested, aren't they?
Again, there's a issue with protecting classified, which of course we're not pure on, with Snowden and the rest. So we all have to do better on that, but I'd love to see it expand because we're all facing the same threat. Of course, the side that you share with has to be reliable and has to commit to it and not politicize it. That's the whole point of intelligence, is to keep it out of that. But no, I don't. I like it. When I was in Beijing, we would do Five Eyes meetings all the time and just kind of have a conversation about what we're seeing and doing about it, and it was productive.
How would you assess the relationship between the two countries? It's obvious, New Zealand and America. I also ask that because in current times that's been tested by the Iran war too, which was deeply opposed by New Zealand according to the polling. So I just wonder how you see that relationship at the moment.
Two things. One, what have you done for me lately? In the end, international affairs are driven by realpolitik.
What do you mean, what have you done for me lately?
Relationships are all give and take, right? It can't be one way.
And do you think that New Zealand isn't giving enough at the moment?
I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, as we talk about a relationship, we should make sure both sides understand that it's a quid pro quo. The basis of diplomacy is reciprocity. People forget that.
Sure. Well, I could ask you. So what have you done for me recently?
That's fine. Ask away. what we've done.
Because the last time I looked, you smashed a pretty massive tariff on a free trading country.
Yeah.
You smashed us with a huge tariff.
Read the Council of Economic Advisors, Steve Myron, on the desire for balanced trade, and this is what this is about. Access to markets and the rest. Tariffs are maybe not the best tool, but they're a lot better and more useful in dealing with the PRC, the Chinese, than whatever else we had before. But let me just say this. In regard to adversaries, not friends, but in regard to adversaries, the PRC has us chasing this relationship laser pointer all over the place. You know, when I was there in 11 to 13, my job was to make them like us. We called this the ardent suitor period, where it didn't matter how badly they offended us or punched us in the face or made my life in China difficult. I had to continue to go back to the government and try to make them like us through showing them things that we probably wouldn't.
So how does this relate to our...
Because excessive focus on relationship misses the whole point about interstate engagement. Like I said, the basis of interstate engagement is reciprocity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate
On that
your
positive
time.
note.
That's right. Thank you very much. That was 30 Minutes with Brigadier General David Stilwell. This is 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We'll catch you next time. Ka kite.